Hi, my name's Dorothy Rasco, and I'm the manager for the Space Shuttle program for the transition retirement. I've been in the program for many years, and I was the Space Shuttle program business manager, and over the last 2 years, I've been the manager for the transition retirement. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about my background. I have a degree in civil environmental engineering, and I came to NASA Johnson Space Center in the civil architectural branch. And one of my jobs back in the early 90s was to shut down the NASA industrial plant, which is in Southern California, Downey, California. So after they delivered Endeavour, my job was to go in and work with the city of Downey and transfer the property to the city to disposition any of the personal property and the real property that was no longer required for processing the vehicle, and anything that we still needed to process the vehicle to do the maintenance upgrades was all transferred and moved to Palmdale, California. All of the orbiter maintenance down period, or known as OMDPs, they were accomplished up in Palmdale and then eventually moved to Florida at the Kennedy Space Center. So when the program manager was looking for a person to do the transition retirement and the shutdown of the shuttle program, they felt as though my experience and my education would be the right segue into making sure that this was a smooth transition. Back in 2004, 2005, it was a very, very difficult time. We needed to complete the final assembly of the space station. So we needed the shuttle program. We needed us up and flying. And so we had to get ourselves up and flying. We had a deadline date of the end of 2010 to have the complete assembly for the space station. And meanwhile, they were doing the early planning for the Constellation program. So there were, at Johnson Space Center, there are three major programs. There was the Constellation program, the station program, and the shuttle program. Shuttle program was two-faceted. It was made up of the operations to be able to fly and finish the assembly of the station, and it was also to do the planning for the shutdown. When we started transition retirement, we were in the operations program, and the operations program was made up of all the different elements in the different projects. So you had all your Marshall elements, and they were all the propulsion elements like the tank motor and engine. And then you had the orbiter, which is what everyone recognizes and resonates with as the orbiter. And then you had mission operations and ground systems at KSC. You had the pads. You had all the ground support equipment that people are familiar with, the crawler, and all of the facilities down there. So when we started planning, we didn't want to reinvent, so we let each of the project elements have their own transition retirement manager within each of the elements. And what we realized was after a point in time, we needed to integrate it within the program. And so to integrate it within the program, even though each of the centers, you had Stennis, Marshall, Kennedy, and Johnson, they had different processes and policies within their centers, institutional organization, and within each of the projects. So as we started digging in and having my experience coming out of the institution, we started the planning without including them. We thought that the shuttle program would do it internal within our programs and projects. Quickly, I realized that we needed the expertise and the knowledge from the institution. The institution is the one that sets up the policy and the processes for doing the dispositioning and the disposal of all the personal property, the real property. The institution is the one that works with GSA when we're dispositioning and disposing the real property. They're the ones that had the environmental experts, the environmental managers, that we knew that we had to leverage off of that expertise and not try and reinvent it within the program. So as soon as we realized who were the right point of contacts within the institution for all of the different centers, we started having telecons and meetings where we could learn from them and include them as we planned further. And so very quickly, the transition and retirement organization, and I would say the group that was the core group, grew to be rather large, because it was not just the program people, it was also all the matrix institutional folks. Well, what I'd like to tell the next program manager that would have to shut down a large 30-year program like the Space Shuttle program is to reach out to those that have the knowledge in the area that you don't have. Don't try to reinvent. Leverage off of the policies and the processes and the people that are within the agency that's already available to help you with all of the areas that you're not as familiar with. Another thing is to reconsider that because you have the organizational structure for an operations program, it may not be the right structure that you want for the shutdown or the closeout of a program. When you're shutting down a program, you are getting into different areas that are not the same and not aligned to when you're in the operations program. And your safety and your risk posture is different, and you need to look at those policies and processes that you wrote in the operational program. You need to ask yourself, these were written for a certain way and for a certain reason for the operations, but do we really need it for the shutdown of the program? There's a TRI program, and this was back in the late 2000s, and it was Space Station, Shuttle, and Constellation. Well, Space Station and Shuttle, we always had program reviews together because Station was dependent on us to complete the assembly of Station, and we were very closely tied to Station because we had the same objectives and because we kind of grew up together. And so we would go back and forth, flight crew equipment, which is where I was a manager for several years. We shared the flight crew equipment. We shared a lot of the processes. We shared a lot of the different laptops and the computers. There would be a little different configuration for Space Station. But we were in the ops mode. They were in the ops mode. When you look at mission control, we had station flight controllers. We had shuttle flight controllers, but they all grew up together. And so we were like one happy family. So then Constellation came along, and they were like the next big program, and they brought in their own culture and their own way of doing business. And one of the first things that they wanted was they didn't want to do it the way the Shuttle program did business. They wanted to have new policies, new processes. They wanted to reinvent to adhere to their new way of doing business and the way their program's culture was. And so we would talk to them about trying to operate similar to Shuttle, because they were using the same centers, Marshall, Kennedy, Johnson, and Stennis. And we had the same centers with the ground support equipment. We had the same centers with the propulsion elements, with the testing going on at Stennis, and then, with all of our launches going on at KSC. So we wanted to share as best we could, but it was clear in the beginning that if it was the Shuttle way, they didn't want to hear it. They wanted to do it their own way. And so the dynamics was we wanted to be in it all together. We were one NASA, and we all would be able to be successful together, and we would all fail together if we didn't make us all successful. However, Constellation in many areas did not want to do it the way the Shuttle program wanted to do it. So when we were working with Constellation, they decided to go with a different size core stage from our external tank. And so we had a lot of ground support equipment, special tooling specific to our external tank that we believed that they could have used, but they decided to go with a different size tank for their core, so they built all new ground support equipment and special test equipment. However, as we were doing the transition and retirement and the last tanks were coming out of Michoud, we wanted to start dispositioning property and letting go the workforce. Constellation wanted us to maintain the property, maintain the workforce in case there was something that they might want to utilize for future use. And the same was with the solid rocket motors. As we had the last motors delivered, and we wanted to go and disposition some of the casings. We wanted to consolidate some of the facilities out in Utah. Constellation wanted us to maintain the facilities, hold on to a lot of the casings, hold on to the people in case they needed them for future use. And in a declining budget, we were struggling what we needed to maintain to safely fly out our program, and set aside what we needed to access and disposition and dispose of, but also consider Constellation's needs and requirements. And those discussions were going on. However, there was never enough budget to maintain all three. We needed to have the open conversations. We needed to put each of us in each other's shoes to understand the situation that we were in and to become sympathetic to each other's needs and find a win-win situation so that we could safely fly out the program, make sure Space Station, we could complete their assembly, but maintain some core, whether it was core capability, whether it was the people or the facility or the tooling, so that Constellation could leverage off what we have and make sure that we could only maintain what was required to keep us all equally within our budget. I'd like to talk a little bit about Contract Closeout. It's really kind of the mundane area of the whole shutdown of the program. You know, everyone likes to see the orbiters going to the museums and all, but the Contract Closeout, it is a very, very tough, major part of the Contract Closeout and can be very, very costly. And so always get the best experts that you can to be on your team. And that means really good procurement folks, really good legal folks, and really good financial folks. Things that happen or come up in Contract Closeout are things that you would never, ever dream of. So you can plan and you can study and you can have processes and policies in place to actually accomplish the technical closeout, which is actually much easier than the contract closeout. But things come up in contract closeout that we did not plan for. For example, we were not only doing the closeout of a contract, we were shutting down a company. This company was a joint venture of Boeing and Lockheed, and they no longer wanted to keep the company going. It was really designed for the operations of the Space Shuttle program, and Space Shuttle was going away. So anyway, not only did we have a 30-year program that we're shutting down the contract, we also have a company that we're shutting down. So some things that came up that were very costly, that were not in the original plan, was the pension for 10,000 employees that were no longer going to have a job with United Space Alliance. The other things that would come up is we have the Department of Labor. They're doing an audit on back in 2007, 2008. So all of your rates that you had back in the mid 2000s, you have your DCAA and DCMA, your defense contract audit folks. They're going and reviewing rates way back in the early 2000s, and it lags. So the contract closeout for this contract will not end till 2021. It's a lot of accounting, a lot of finance, and it's like reviewing all the books and making sure everything's aligned appropriately. As you're letting people go, your best finance people, your best procurement people, because you're winding down this program, all of a sudden, some of the things that you would never plan for come up, and they're not technical. They're legal or procurement type issues, and you need to make sure that you maintain those best folks on your team to the very end. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about risk management. Being the business manager for the Space Shuttle program, we didn't really get into the risk management activities until like 2006, 2007. And I kept trying to figure out, how does the budget process fit into the risk management? And then I realized, after having long conversations with my program manager and talking about all the activities that were going on, we were planning for the transition retirement, we were we were safely flying out the space shuttle program to complete the assembly of the space station was, how do we take the budget and our reserves and we make the hard decisions of how you allocate it to where all the threats were within the program. So one of the areas that we looked at when we were managing our risks is the human capital. That is one area that a program manager that's shutting down any program really needs to focus on. As a manager, one of the processes that's one of the most useful tools is the risk process. We used it so much, and it was one of our top priorities that we reviewed for the operations, and I kept it and continued using that same process for the transition retirement because I saw the value added for helping me make the hard decisions, and the risk process that has been laid out for the shuttle program and for the shuttle transition retirement is very valuable, and any program manager should make sure that they use that process. So I wanted to share with you my 3 big takeaways for the shutdown and the transition retirement, the shuttle program. The first one is maintaining the critical skills that you require. And it could be maintaining them for the technical side, whether it's for the hardware, the vehicle, whether it's maintaining the critical skills for the procurement and the legal advisors that you have, or maintaining the critical skills for your IT support, and making sure that you have the right team to do the transition retirement of your program. Second is looking at the different processes that are different, whether it's the technical processes for an operational program versus for the shutdown and the transition retirement. Sometimes the processes for processing flight hardware is very conservative. And when you're processing the hardware for flying in space, it's very different than when you're processing the hardware for going to, like, taking an orbiter to a museum. So you need to review those processes, and you need to streamline for the transition retirement because it does not have to be as stringent or as conservative. And then third is communication and picking your right team. Your team needs to understand why you're here, what you're doing. When we were doing the transition and retirement of the program, we picked the team that knew that that was what our mission and goal was. It was hard after the vehicle landed for people to accept the fact that the shuttle program was going to be shut down. But if you picked the right team that knew what our job was and we stuck to our guns, that is very important for any program manager if they're going to shut down a program.